Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Elgin High School's final week of NBTI.
Thank you for everyone who's joining right now. Today's presenter is Chris Benda, a botanist working in Illinois. Chris, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Okay, terrific. It's going. Thank you all for attending, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this National Biodiversity.
It looks like we're having trouble hearing you right now. Oh, sorry. All right, go ahead.
We're ready? Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending, and I appreciate the invitation to speak to you all for the National Biodiversity Teach-In. My name is Chris Benda, and I do a lot of different things, as you're about to learn, but one of the main contracts I'm working on right now is with the Chicago Botanic Garden to implement the Plants of Concern program, which is a rare plant monitoring program in which we employ the help of a lot of volunteers, actually. I'm also very active with the Illinois Native Plant Society, and it's an organization that I encourage people to check out, and you'll learn more through the presentation. You can also find me online as Illinois Botanizer. So I have a website, illinoisbotanizer.com. Most of the social media taken care of, as well as my YouTube channel. And also on my website, I have been botanizing in Illinois for about 20 years now. And I've taken a lot of photos of plants. So I have about 1,100 species illustrated on my website, with different entries and photos. So I encourage you to check that out. And I do a lot of programming in person and virtually. So my speaking schedule is available on my website, but you can subscribe to the mailing list on the website as well. And I try to send email reminders for upcoming events, of which I have many scheduled for March and April. And I'd like to take a minute to just have this land acknowledgement that basically acknowledges that there were other cultures, other people that were living on this land before colonization. And it's important, I think, to think about how much we have irrevocably changed the landscape in Illinois and beyond. And it's going to be hard, really, to change a lot of that. What's done has been done, but I think it's important to realize that a lot of the natural areas we have remaining today were thankful for the maintenance techniques that were provided by the people that came before. So I'd like to start with this story. This is the Guarneri violin. That was the name of the violin maker, which is in Italy in 1731. And you may be familiar with his contemporary, who was Stradivari. And he made a lot of violins too. And these gentlemen actually worked at the same time in the same Italian village, making these violins that are works of art. And I heard this story just about a year ago, actually, on NPR, because they were auctioning off one of these instruments. Now, the people who are really excel at playing such an instrument don't have the money to buy such a rare item. So people with the money buy them and they loan them out to musicians and they play them. And the NPR reporter that played it said it's like going from a Camry to a Lamborghini. So what he was getting at is these violins have a unique sound, and that we can, modern day techniques, we can replicate these violins to look exactly the same, but they don't sound the same. We do not have the technology or know-how to build a violin that sounds the way that it does with these violin makers. And Stradivari, there's about over 200 or so of those violins left in the world today. So they're very rare and they're worth a lot, but the Guarneri violins, there's, I think, less than 20. So not very many, and that makes them very valuable. So this is an example of vanishing knowledge. We don't have the intuition and the bias and the understanding that these violins makers had when they made them. And so that knowledge is now gone, and that makes these things why they're so special and rare. So it brings me to an essay by this biology professor at Rutgers University. And he had several other examples of vanishing knowledge, but the point of his essay was there is no store of learning in greater danger of disappearing than our long accumulated knowledge of the natural world. And, you know, David Attenborough follows on this and said, so why is that important to us? Well, it seems to me that the natural world is the greatest source of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living. Now, George and Barbara Fell knew this all too well in their time. This was in the 40s, 50s, 60s primarily. And George grew up in Rockford area, and his father was a botanist, an amateur botanist. He was a doctor, when a lot of times doctors were also botanists on the side. And he grew up in this property where there was a lot of natural land that he could explore. And basically, after World War II, the land conversion excelled at a rapid pace. And he noticed that these natural areas, these pristine places that hadn't been largely developed or altered, were disappearing at a very fast rate. And he realized that we need to save these places now, because if we don't, there will never be another chance. So George and Barbara went on to found the Nature Conservancy, which is the largest conservation organization in the world today. They also formed the Natural Land Institute, which is in Rockford still today. And most importantly, developed the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, which is a state law that says landowners can voluntarily enroll their land in the program and that it will be protected in perpetuity. So Illinois was the first state to do this, and it was really a pioneering legislation. So what I'm talking about when I talk about natural areas are high quality natural communities. So these are places that have retained or recovered their original natural character, need not be completely undisturbed, but have ecological features of statewide significance. So we think of these areas as pristine or nearly pristine natural areas. This is a table then that shows all the different natural community types that are in Illinois. So of course we have forests, we have different types of forests, upland forests, floodplain forests. We have prairies, different types of prairies. There are hill prairies, there are shrub prairies, sand prairies, and so on. So these are all the different communities known to occur in Illinois. So now that George and Barbara Fell created this mechanism for land to be protected, the big idea was, well, how do we figure out where all these natural areas are in Illinois so that we can work on protecting them? So that led to the INAI, the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory. Again, Illinois, the first state to do a systematic scan, section by section across all 102 counties of Illinois for areas of biological significance. And in 1979, when a majority of these areas were identified, we found that just 0.07% of the state of Illinois was in a pristine natural condition. So that's very, very little amount. It's about 28,000 acres out of 36 million acres in Illinois. But as the graphic here displays, all the pink and blue are natural areas and nature preserves in Illinois. So they are distributed throughout the state with a large concentration in southern Illinois and northeast Illinois. Here's another graphic here that shows what I just explained in these large circles. You can see very small amount. We've converted the landscape to urban areas and agriculture primarily. So Illinois Beach Nature Preserve in Lake County is an outstanding site, and it is the first nature preserve in Illinois. And since Illinois was the first state to have a nature preserve system, it's the first nature preserve in the nation. So I like to say people go to Kansas to see the largest ball of twine, but who's coming to Illinois to see the first nature preserve in the nation? This is something I think that could be promoted more, or really get the word out that Illinois was a pioneer in the natural areas movement, and we have these beautiful places protected and preserved in perpetuity. And this photo to me really demonstrates how to recognize a natural area, that the plants are well dispersed and that you can see just high quality vegetation existing in this sand prairie near the shores of Lake Michigan. So I want to tell you about another cool plant that grows at this site that's federally threatened. So we have some plants that are listed at the state level, state threatened, state endangered, but then the ones that are rarer would be federally listed, federally endangered, or federally threatened. So the pitcher's thistle is one, and it grows in these sand dunes along Lake Michigan. And it is quite rare in Illinois. In fact, it's believed extirpated, but which means no longer occurring naturally, but it has been planted at places where it formerly occurs. I actually had to jump across the border here to Indiana to get these photos of the plant blooming. But I grew up in a suburban area where my dad told me to spray the thistles with, weed killer, and you'd run around on the grass in your bare feet. You wouldn't want to step on thistles. They kind of get a bad rap. Well, first of all, a lot of those are European thistles. We have many native thistles. So they get a bad reputation, but we have some quite rare thistles in Illinois, including the pitcher's thistle. And there's the range there. You can see it's only along the shores of the Great Lakes, and nowhere else in the world can you see this plant. So quite special. We have some in Illinois. Now, we do have a preserve named after George Fell. George in his time, unfortunately, the men were kind of getting most of the recognition and doing a lot of the work. I would like to see this site be called the George and Barbara Fell Nature Preserve. We all know that women were playing a strong role sometimes behind the scenes at the time. And maybe someday we'll have a Barbara Fell Nature Preserve. But currently, this is the George Fell Nature Preserve in Ogle County along the Rock River. And it's at Castle Rock State Park. So there's a nice look out there. You can see the Rock River. And I love Ogle County. I mean, Ogle County's got so many neat places. And I travel there about every year. And if you go in the area in the spring, there's the trifecta of plants you want to find. So the bottom left is the pasque flower, which blooms around Easter, hence the name. Then, of course, we have skunk cabbage in the middle, one of our earliest wildflowers. And then the snow trillium, which is aptly named because it blooms so early, sometimes there's still snow on the ground when those plants emerge. So those are three somewhat unique and hard to find plants in Illinois. So why do we have such few natural areas remaining? And one of the reasons is a friend like to term this the niceification of nature. So to some people, this photo, the habitat looks nice, a nice, well-kept lawn, trimmed, all neat and tidy. But nothing can live here except perhaps some organisms in the soil. There's no plants thriving here, and it's because of that there are really no animals. And so this is a sterilized environment, and it's not good for nature. And it doesn't need to be used this way. In fact, you can see here in the picture, it's a little bit of a slope that could be a pond, and you could have frogs and butterflies and all kinds of life living here in this area that's just currently being mowed. And across the street, it's even worse. It's well-kept ditches with agricultural, monocultures of agricultural plants. So there's really missed opportunity here that we can create habitat for plants and animals to occur. So Illinois is the prairie state. 22 million acres of the 36 million in the whole state was once prairie, and we reduced that to 2,200 acres. So a tiny amount of prairie remains in the state. And of course, it isn't all in one contiguous chunk. It's in little tiny pieces spread out through all these different counties. So we've really fragmented the landscape. Now, of course, Illinois has very rich farmland, very rich soil, and we are feeding the world. And I don't have anything against farming, but I think that there needs to be a little more of a balance here. And unfortunately, we've pretty much taken it all, which means that the areas that remain are very important. So let's look at another graphic here. This is Munson Township Prairie. This is in Henry County, near the little town of Cambridge. And you can see here the gravestones mixed in the native prairie. These cemeteries were set aside in the 1800s for burials, and so they were not largely changed. They were probably being mowed for the most part, but in the 1960s and 70s, they were identified as areas where prairie still occurred, and a lot of them are now protected as nature preserves. But if we zoom out here and look at the aerial photography, we can see that Munson Cemetery, the green area there is about 20 acres or so, and only maybe 7 or so of those acres is really high quality prairie. The other parts are degraded and a little weedy. But if we zoom out here, you can see kind of a larger square with the road on one side. That is one section. A section in Illinois is 1 mile by 1 mile. So 1 square mile, 640 acres. And you can see Munson Township Cemetery, just a little piece of that 640 acres. Now we zoom out even farther, we can see lots of those large squares, which represent the sections. And you can barely pick out Munson Cemetery on the map because this is how small it is in this large agricultural matrix of where we've converted the land to. And that's why Aldo Leopold said Pacoons only converse with the dead, because he noticed that this plant was conservative, meaning only found in pristine areas, which in his time were these pioneer cemetery prairies, where they were set aside so long ago that they still had the original flora. And this was a plant that you aren't going to find on the roadsides or more widespread. They're relegated to these small patches of high quality land that persists. Which is another reason why I like this quote from E.L. Wilson: every scrap of biodiversity is priceless, never to be surrendered without a struggle. And we can see here, this picture, this is what I would call a scrap, a small piece of original Illinois prairie. You can see the railroad bed on the left and the soybean field on the right, and in between there, from where I'm taking this photo to that tree, basically, is a piece of true unplowed tallgrass prairie in Illinois. And an average observer might look at this and say, that just looks like a field of grass. You know, why not just mow that, or why not plow it up and expand the field? At this point today, to plow this up would be like taking that Guarneri violin and smashing it to pieces. You would never do that. It is precious and priceless. And one thing that you can recognize in the photo that explains this is it's got this grayish shrubby looking thing, this plant. That's lead plant, Amorpha canescens. And lead plant has a deep taproot such that once an area is plowed, that plant doesn't occur there anymore. It's destroyed. And so just the presence of that tells you that this is a high quality, undisturbed piece of land in Livingston County. So of course, the average person, I think, doesn't see the landscape this way. And so that is why I really connect with this additional quote by Aldo Leopold, where he says, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. You see these wounds on the landscape that other people ignore or dismiss. And it sometimes is challenging emotionally. And so he says that we either have to harden our shell or be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise. So it's tough work being a botanist and ecologist in the state, but it is important work. Now, of course, Dr. Doug Tallamy knows this very well, and he's been a great messenger for getting the word out about the importance of native plants, that you have to have native plants in order to have native animals, in order to have an ecosystem so that we're contributing and preserving the biodiversity that occurs on the planet. And he has many publications about this. And his big idea of late has been the homegrown national park. That so much land in Illinois or so much land in the United States is in private ownership, and that we need these private owners to have these landscapes that provide habitat for plants and animals. And in doing so, we can have our own homegrown national park. And I've had the opportunity of meeting Dr. Tallamy several times. And again, the importance of this, because as Dr. Jerry Wilhelm said, the extent to which the infinitely complex weave of the earth upon which we depend becomes tattered is the extent to which the fabric of our own existence is frayed. Spoken so well. And you can see here we are on Foltz Hill Prairie in Monroe County, flagging rare plants to get a census for them there at this absolutely exquisite site. It's probably the best hill prairie complex we have in all of Illinois that has been preserved and protected in perpetuity. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have its challenges, and we've been facing a lot of issues trying to maintain it, but it is currently has some parcels that are in very good condition. So a little bit more of background about Jerry Wilhelm. He's a botanist living and working in Illinois. He co-authored with Laura Verica, The Flora of Chicago Region, which is a masterpiece of science. And it's a totally unique book that it's very technical in nature, but there are many aspects about it that set it apart from anything else in the realm of technical botany manuals. And Jerry has an interesting story about getting into botany that I'll briefly share with you. He, when he graduated from high school, the Vietnam War was underway, and so he went on to community college and did well enough to continue on to the university and studied in Florida. And when he finished, the war was still underway and he was drafted, but he had a biology degree now under his belt. And so he was hoping that would keep him away from the infantry unit, essentially. And when he got his orders, he was assigned to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So he was not going to Vietnam. He was going to help them. And they thought they were getting a hotshot scientist, he told me. And so he went there and they said, your first assignment is to go to Lockport, Illinois. The Army Corps is dredging the river and they need to pile the dredge spoils on land. And they've identified 50 sites where this could be done and you need to evaluate them. So long story short, he hooked up with some eminent botanists and they looked at a bunch of places and they found themselves at what is now Lockport Prairie Nature Preserve, where they saw very rare plants and things that they'd not seen at the other sites. And it was an epiphany for him. He wanted to know that basically Ray Schulenberg that he was with said, Jerry, do not spoil here, for this is America and it will not grow back. And that was important words to him as a young man. And he wanted to know that minute forward when he was in America and when he was not. So he developed this coefficient of conservatism, which explains that, which I kind of mentioned earlier with the hoary puccoon. Hoary puccoon and others are conservative plants. They're only found in pristine natural areas. C values close to 10, where weeds, I like to call them, ecologically speaking, plants that are successful in badly damaged habitats are not conservative and have values closer to 0. So this is a very important idea and technique that we use to conduct floristic quality analysis, which is essentially analyzing an area for natural quality. Let's see how good condition it's in. Now, I relate a little bit to Jerry's story in that I guess I didn't share the whole backstory, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And all those experiences led him to be the botanist he is today, you know, one of the world's experts. Myself, I would not put among the world's experts, but I would say that I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. And it took me an automotive degree and some business classes before I changed my degree to ecology, and worked in Minnesota and California and found my way to Illinois to study Blanding's turtles. And that really was the best decision I ever made in my life. The rest is history, as they say. And I worked with Blanding's turtles. And one of the stories I wanted to share with you is that I was in Illinois as a young man in my 20s. I'd lived here maybe a month, and the female Blanding's turtles, they nest at night. So we're going out all day tracking and trapping turtles and doing our work, and then go home and eat and clean up and then go back in the field when it's dark to follow females to see where they're going to lay their nests. And then we would put a cage around the nest to protect them, and we could count the hatchlings and the eggs and all this stuff for our study. So the first one that I saw nesting, I happened to go out there by myself, and it was about midnight. And the turtle had crossed the road into a front lawn of a private home. Didn't look like anybody was home, but we're very close to the Lake Michigan, and it was starting to storm and lightning and thunder, and I could hear the waves crashing on the beach. And I'm checking on this turtle, and I don't want to disturb it, so I'm looking and seeing if it's still there, and then leaving and coming back. And once they get started nesting, they kind of get in a trance, and then they're not so much disturbed. So I was able to see this individual, Viola, we named her, start nesting and digging, you know, the hole and dropping eggs in, and I'm counting eggs, and I was like Count Dracula. I remember thinking, 1 egg, 2 eggs, 3 eggs. She laid 22 eggs. This was our largest female that we had in the population. The average clutch size, the average number of eggs that a Blanding's turtle lay is 11. So she doubled that. And I sat there it was just an extraordinary experience watching this turtle lay eggs with the environment that was happening at the time. And I was hooked. I was hooked on this work. So here's the distribution of Blanding's turtles, by the way, largely around the Great Lakes, but out to Nebraska and even Massachusetts and Nova Scotia. Now, this led to the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory update. So I mentioned the inventory. It started in 1976, and there was like a big push to find a lot of areas. And by 1979, that project had ended, so to speak, but the inventory has been ongoing, and areas have been continually added. But the majority of them were located and added to the list in 76 to 79. So in 2008, I was hired. They wanted to repeat this project. And I had Southern Illinois, 19 counties to explore. I worked from home by myself. I had a summer assistant in the summertime. I used my own car. We were given, computers and microscopes and all the equipment we would need. And my job was to explore, to find new areas of biological significance. So I did this for 4 years. And as you can see the results there, I drove a lot of miles, took a lot of photos, spent most of my time in the field. I identified 685 potential areas, and 50 of those made it all the way to nomination. So we did add a number of new natural areas since 2012. And since then, that really catapulted my career. That was my first essential full-time job after my master's degree, which was at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And now I have current and former contracts and associations with most of the conservation organizations and agencies in Illinois, and these continue to this day. So something interesting that sounds kind of obvious, but frankly is this simple for me. What got me started into botany specifically was this simple question: what is that? And for me, the thing that hooked me right away was flowers, pretty flowers. When I started learning plants, if it wasn't flowering, if it wasn't a conspicuous, colorful flower, then I didn't pay attention to it. I started with just the pretty flowers with a guidebook, and digital cameras came out, were common about 2004 when I was starting doing this. So it was easy to carry a camera in your pocket, which of course we all have now. But at the time I had a little camera, and I would take photos and learn these plants. In the first summer in Illinois, 2004, doing the Blandings turtle research, I photographed and labeled almost 400 species of flowers. A lot of diversity. This was in Lake County, Illinois. So building on that led me to do lots of different experiences in the state. And I want to just highlight a few neat plants that you should know about, among other experiences that I want to share today as well. So this one here, I mentioned that we have some federally endangered plants and some federally threatened plants. Well, in Illinois, there's only one species that is federally endangered, and that's this one, leafy prairie clover. In fact, this is one that was also thought extirpated for a while, and it was rediscovered or located at a preserve in Will County, where it actually persists today and is doing quite well. Dahlia foliosa. So that's a neat plant in Illinois. And you can see here, this is its worldwide distribution. All the counties in shaded yellow are counties in which this plant has once been recorded or observed in. So that may not be there in all those counties today. In fact, in Illinois, I can tell you it's not in any of those counties except in Will County. So a very rare species is the leafy prairie clover. Another really neat plant that we have in Illinois that is kind of amazing is the bird's eye primrose, Primula mystacinica. And it grows at Apple River Canyon on the crumbly, wet dolomite ledges. So it's kind of protected in that sort of environment, but this is a boreal relic. So this is a plant of Canada, and it occurs in Illinois because of glaciation, right? During glacial times, plants migrated as the climate cooled to more hospitable environments. And then when the climate warmed and the ice melted, they would persist in these microclimates of, shaded, moist canyon areas. So we look at the map here for this, a few locations in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, but it's mostly all in Canada. And we have just one county, Joe Davis County in Illinois, where this plant persists today. Another neat one is the lakeside daisy. Unfortunately, another one extirpated from the state, meaning had been locally extinct, extinct in Illinois, and but has been replanted at a few places. So it's kind of a neat one. And again, federally threatened species. We can look at the map here. Look at how rare this is. Looks like there's just a few counties that are mapped for this species, mostly on the shores of the Great Lakes. And we do have a little bit of it in Illinois that has been replanted. So very rare, that one. And then some other beautiful ones I want to share, the Oklahoma grass pink. This is one of my favorite photos of all time. And the experience seeing this plant, I was there with the preserve biologist before it bloomed, and he just kind of nonchalantly pointed and said, in this area is where, you know, I was shown this plant years ago, and I was learning plants. So, you know, I wanted to see them all. And of course, I love orchids. So this wasn't particularly super notable to me at the time, other than I wanted to see it. So I returned in June 2013 and photographed this plant, and I've never seen it there since. It is still in Illinois. It is at a few different preserves in Will County, but it is quite rare. And this photo is just a great capture of it. And I think back on this experience, and I treasure it today. I'm not sure I fully grasped at the time how special it was. And it's one of my favorite nature encounters. And you see the distribution here. A lot of the observations for this are in Oklahoma, hence the name Calopogon oklahomensis. Now, another one very rare in Illinois is the oval-leaved milkweed, Asclepias ovalifolia. And this one has another fascinating story. I can't share them all. I'd be here all day, but essentially this plant was almost extirpated, and actually they were able to bring back a few plants. And when I was there again in 2013, I got this great photo of it, which is important to me today because sadly these plants are not doing well, and there's only one site where they're known from. In fact, they were thought extirpated for like 30 years or so before they were discovered in a preserve, and they did their best to try to bolster the populations. But plants, you know, just like humans, if you're closely related, you have sterility issues. You know, they have reproductive bottlenecks. So these plants, they're essentially inbred, and so they don't make viable offspring without getting some genetic diversity. And so sometimes they bring plants from other states that presumably have other genetic material to try to get reproductive success, but it's very hard. And so far, it's not looking very good in Illinois for this species, but it is still persisting. And you can see there, you know, those are in Illinois, at least all those counties are formally where it had been seen. Currently, it's only known at one preserve in Cook County. And then Mead's milkweed is another very rare one. This is federally threatened. And again, it has kind of the same issues. In fact, a recent study out of Missouri showed that populations are really only successful when they have 50 flowering individuals or more. Well, this is a site that I've been visiting for a long time in the Shawnee National Forest, and there's just 3 mature plants that bloom. And juveniles have been produced and they don't make it to maturity. They die out. New stock has been introduced from other states. Nothing seems to be working. We call them geriatric plants. It's the same 3 plants that bloom every year, but they're not making viable seed. So this one's hanging on for now. And you can see it was formerly, you know, in many counties in Illinois, and it's only extant down in Southern Illinois, extant meaning present. But it has been planted. There is a couple other places now where you can find them where they have replanted them. And then lastly, I want to share these 2. I kind of joke with people and say, I shouldn't even be talking about these. These are so rare in Illinois and so exquisitely beautiful that I just want to share with you that they exist. I've seen them. I've photographed them many times. They're treasures. We try tight-lipped, right, about locations because we need to protect these species. But these are some exquisite ones that we do have in Illinois. Now, going to Southern Illinois, just a couple of things to mention. This is a special plant there, the French's shooting star. It was thought to be endemic to the region. Endemic meaning only occurring, you know, within Illinois or within a portion of Illinois or a particular area of Illinois. And this was in the Shawnee Hills of Southern Illinois. So that is unglaciated sandstone canyons. And this plant only occurs underneath these overhangs and what we call the drip line, where the water drips off the cliffs. And this may look similar to the common shooting star, which is in every single county in Illinois. So I don't want you to be confused about that. But this one only occurs in Southern Illinois in sandstone canyons, again, under overhangs and cliff ledges and such. It has since been located in a number of other states, so not endemic to Southern Illinois, but Southern Illinois has the mother lode of it. And of course, nowhere else in the world can you see this plant. So that's one very special to Southern Illinois that blooms in April and May. But I also want to discuss some animals here. What is that, right? This is the banded sphinx moth. I was at a wonderful site called Grantsburg Swamp. Of course, Grantsburg Swamp's a coastal plain, part of Southern Illinois, where we have cypress trees in, their natural environment. And we have cottonmouths, which are venomous snakes. And so you're kind of wading through the water, through cypress trees and past these snakes and stuff, exploring the plants. And we came across this plant called hairy primrose willow. And there was this caterpillar on it. And it's like the size of my thumb, at least. I mean, a large caterpillar, very brilliantly patterned. It turned out to be this banded sphinx moth, which they use the Onagraceae family, which is the evening primrose family. Those plants in that family are what the host plant is for this one. That's what they eat and lay their eggs on. So it made sense we found one on this plant. And the other interesting thing about this is, if you look at current distribution records, this particular species had not been observed in Johnson County. And so not only did we see this neat caterpillar, but we documented a county record for this species plant in Johnson County. Another neat one here, a lot of people are surprised to learn that we have scorpions in Illinois, the striped bark scorpion. They pretty much only occur in Monroe County, limestone glades. They hide under limestone slabs of rock. And so you carefully flip the rock up to see if there are any under there. Of course, you want to be careful doing this. We want to make sure that we return the environment back to the way that it was. We don't want to make it look disturbed. So if you go looking for animals under logs and rocks and crevices, make sure that you return everything to its original position, because we have sites where you can tell that somebody came through there and it looked like they flipped everything and looked at everything, and that's destroying the habitat for these. So we want to take care when doing that. But that's where you find these scorpions. So we lift up this rock. You can see the one here. I took this here as a selfie, or it didn't happen, right? Got to get a selfie with all the rare plants and animals. And you can really see then how small the scorpions can be here. But really a neat occurrence. And this is a venomous species, right? You get stung by them. It's painful. Speaking of venomous, we also have venomous snakes in Illinois. And this is one that we have in Southern Illinois. It actually occurs up, through all the way through Illinois up to the Northwest, but there are some healthy populations in the South. And I've been fortunate to see a number of, this was the very first one that I've ever saw. It was in 2009 in Jackson County. It was quite a magnificent animal. I love snakes. I don't typically go looking for animals. I am out so much that I encounter them and I appreciate them and I photograph them. And like I did with this individual. But now in my 15 years or so of being in Southern Illinois, I've seen over 40 timber rattlesnakes, and some of them quite large. And they command so much respect. It may surprise people to learn that they're docile. They don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to really bite. They just sit there. As long as you just observe them, there's nothing to fear. And if anything, I've seen them decide they're not interested and move away. This whole idea of snakes coming after me or snakes trying to bite you, that's just erroneous. Snakes want to escape, and they don't want to bite unless they absolutely have to. If you leave snakes alone, they will leave you alone. And so I've been fortunate to see some magnificent examples of this gorgeous snake. But probably the coolest nature experience that I've ever encountered was this here, a copper belly water snake. So we have 5 species of water snakes in Illinois, and this is the copper belly. And one time I was walking through the woods looking at, the vegetation and such, and I stumbled upon a snake in the birthing process. So some snakes lay eggs, and of course the eggs hatch and the individuals come out of the egg. Other snakes have live birth, which means that they're essentially incubating the eggs inside the mother's body, and then they hatch out of the egg still inside her body, and then they emerge ready to, they're fully mobile. And you can imagine, it's a much better strategy for young snakes to be able to move immediately rather than have to exist as in the egg stage where they could be dug up and eaten and such. So this snake had just emerged from its mother at the tail area there. And it was just an absolutely amazing experience to see that in the wild. I know people could see this in photograph and lab and stuff, but to actually encounter it in the wild was quite rare. And I was fortunate for that experience. Some other neat animals I've seen, alligator snapping turtles we do have in Southern Illinois. They're quite rare. You can see the range there. They just make it barely up the Mississippi to this area. We have a frog named after Illinois. The Illinois chorus frogs are quite rare, and they occur in sand prairies and sandy areas. But now I want to move on to tell you a little bit about the Illinois Big Tree Register, another neat project I worked on, which was we have documented the largest tree of each species, native species that occurs in Illinois. Now, we have a lot of vacancies right now. First, I'll explain what does large mean. We're looking for the largest tree, the state champion. These are three measurements. It's the circumference in inches, it's the height in feet, and it's 1/4 of the average canopy spread. So usually measure the canopy one direction and then perpendicular to that, average those two numbers, and then just 1/4 of that. So most of the point score comes from the circumference, the trunk size. And you can see the large cherry bark oak I'm measuring in that photo. So if you do some Googling, you can find this website that shows the locations and the specimens for the trees that are currently on the register. There are 184 native species that are eligible, considered trees in Illinois. And currently, this is a little bit dated. This is an ongoing project. Ones are always being added and removed. But when I last looked, 102 champions are listed. So there's a number of vacancies. 82 vacancies. More than 82 because there's some co-champions. But in any event, I'll move on here. I'm running out of time. Illinois has 2 national champion trees, the Ohio Buckeye and Kansas Hawthorn, which is kind of special. So these trees need to be measured every 10 years to stay on the list. And a lot of them hadn't been measured in a long time. So I got some funding from the Illinois Forestry Development Council to visit these trees and to remeasure them or see if they were still there. So I did this in 2021, 2022. I investigated 80 trees on the registry. 54 were updated. 16 were dead or could not be located based on the information I had. 23 were remeasured, 15 ousted and disqualified, and then I nominated 26 additional ones. So there's a lot of work there to bring the registry up to date. And I thought it'd be cool to show you the 5 largest trees in Illinois of each species. So this is the #1 largest tree in Illinois. It's a cottonwood. It's near Byron, Illinois, and in a nature preserve or forest preserve, I should say. And it is quite large. Huge circumference, very tall, a magnificent tree. It's really a stunning one to see. You look at it and you think that is a massive tree. And it's still standing there in that preserve. There's another picture that you can really see. I had to return. It's best to measure these trees in the winter, usually, especially if they're growing in the canopy, because you can't see the top of the tree when all the leaves are on them. So in this case, I went back in June so I could see it in its full leafed out glory. The second biggest tree in Illinois, which was the largest tree for a long time until the cottonwood was found, was a bald cypress down in Pulaski County. And you can see there now, we measure the circumference at 4.5 feet from the ground. And if they're in the water, you still measure from the ground. So I canoed out there and I jumped out of my canoe and walked around the base of the tree to measure it. It's probably the most fun example that I had to measure. And it is quite large too. It's only a few points behind the cottonwood. You see another one. It's got a nice buttress on it where you can stand there and on the tree and remarking its beauty. It's not the biggest looking tree. It doesn't have a bunch of a canopy and it's not all that tall, but it has a huge base, and that's why it ranks so high. #3 is not too far from the bald cypress. It's in the Heron Pond Nature Preserve area in the Cache River wetlands. It's a cherry bark oak. And it has also a huge circumference on it. It is a very impressive tree. It's always fun, to see champion trees that there's no doubt which one it is. It's that big giant right there. Of course, this one has a sign on it, and that's nice to see as well. And it explains the measurements. So it was a fun one to measure. A lot of people have been to this tree. It's a short walk. It's a great preserve. So if you're down in Johnson County in Southern Illinois, make sure to go see the cherry bark oak. Number 4 is actually another oak, Shumard oak, and I have not seen, unfortunately. It is a massive tree. I hear it's dying, unfortunately, but it is one I have not visited. But I did go to number 5, which is a sycamore, and we do have a lot of big sycamores still in the state. But this one was just gigantic on private land. It was a very special experience. I just recall being so thankful the landowners allowed me to go look at this tree, and I was there by myself on a beautiful spring day. It's just one of those moments where you're just thankful for being able to do what you can do, and thankful for your legs and your arms and all that stuff, that you can just have just gratitude for life. And then, because sassafras is a common tree that doesn't get very large, I thought I would show people the largest sassafras in the state, which is really big, really big. So I want to mention some other big ones here. The Ohio Buckeye is in Oak Brook, which is in DuPage County. It is really large. We like to say, take that, Ohio. Illinois has got the biggest Ohio Buckeye. And it's been there a long time. And then what's also interesting is flowering dogwood is also a tree that doesn't get very large. And this one here was planted, I think, in the late 1890s. They know the exact person and the exact year that this tree was planted in this cemetery. And it's unfortunately cracking, and it probably isn't long for this world, but it is a magnificent specimen when it's in full bloom. So those are all the trees I was able to remeasure that went on that fun project. And it wouldn't be a proper presentation without briefly mentioning the Chusa grasslands to you all. That this is in Lee and Ogle counties. And Bill Kleiman is a friend of mine. He's been the preserve manager since its inception and has really done a remarkable example with volunteers and staff to basically recreate a high quality prairie ecosystem up in Lee and Ogle counties. And they've returned bison to the scene now too. And it was one of the visits we were able to drive right by them and get a nice close look at the bison out of the preserve. So really another special experience that I had in Illinois. So I'm getting tight on time. I want to leave some room for questions. So I guess I'll just briefly mention 2 other things here. Going outside of Illinois, I want to tell you about a project I did in Missouri where I studied 37 fens. Fens are a type of wetland where groundwater basically comes up from under the surface, or they're like springs. And me and a colleague were able to canoe down Greer Spring, which flows into the 11-Point River in the Missouri Ozarks. This area, the picture on the left, you can hike a trail down and see the spring. You can go there, but you can't go anywhere else down this entire spring run all until you get to the 11-Point River. Nobody is allowed, very strictly enforced. But I was working with the Forest Service, and they were evaluating this area, and we were able to canoe down Greer Spring Branch. Nobody can do this. If you're doing this, you're breaking the rules, and very few people have done this with permission. So I just felt incredibly fortunate to have the experience of going down this stream, which is considered some of in Missouri, high quality aquatic flora. There's really not much else like this. And it was really neat to have that experience. So lastly, I'll mention I have other field work in Hawaii. And this April, I'll be going there for my 10th trip. We work at a military installation, doing some monitoring. The monitoring, honestly, is not all that exciting, but usually when I'm there, I get to have some time to go to the beach or go up into the mountains and see some unique flora for Hawaii. And it's really been a special experience. So I'm not sure how much time you want me to leave for questions. We have about 13 minutes. Should I cover a little more? Should we end there?
We had a few questions in the chat.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. So the first question is from Miss Blush's class, and it says, what are the consequences of the loss or degradation of natural prairies, both locally and globally?
What can you read that again?
What are the consequences of the loss or degradation of natural prairies, both locally and globally?
So there are a lot of, I mean, essentially we're going back to Doug Tallamy's idea of that we have to have native plants in order to have native animals. So it has to be places for these things to live. And so this is a really rare ecosystem type that we have almost exterminated basically in Illinois. So what's interesting is that a lot of the plants that are rare in Illinois are common in other states. So there's not a lot of, Illinois is a relatively young landscape. So there's not a lot of things that if we remove them here, they'll be extinct in the world. But things are special in Illinois and we want to retain those things. And so there's a whole argument about, like, I could bring lots of examples about why the loss is concerning, but essentially it comes down to biodiversity. We need to have lots of different types of different things because we never know what we're going to need in the future. And we don't know how, we have very little understanding how these things are interrelated. And so what the consequences are is still kind of a question mark. I mean, it would be like going to an airplane and pulling out a bunch of rivets and then being like, well, what does this mean? Well, let's go fly it and see what happens. Like, you wouldn't do that, right? It could be disaster. So that's my favorite analogy, but it is, I mean, I could talk for an hour about how to answer that question, but briefly that's my answer.
Okay, then we also have a question regarding the pitcher's thistle in particular. What threats does the pitcher's thistle face in terms of habitat loss, invasive species, and climate change?
Well, climate change is an interesting one because we are definitely seeing species moving north. And anybody who's a gardener saw that the USDA released their plant zone map update, and people are in new zones now. So plants that are going to thrive in your region are different and they're more adapted to the changing, the warming climate, basically. Invasive species, unfortunately, are rampant across the landscape. In the sand areas, sand is a harsh environment because the sand is always moving around. And so the plants kind of have to be adapted for that. The main thing with the pitcher's thistle is habitat loss. We have converted, like, the places along Lake Michigan where the beach occurs. That's where people want to have multi-million-dollar homes and we want to develop it and live there. And so we don't have these places for those plants to occur. And that's probably the main reason why they are really rare there today. And again, this is about biodiversity. We want to retain as many different, we are losing species faster than we can observe them. So we want to make sure we can retain the ones that we know about, including pitcher's thistle.
So the next question is, are there any native fragments in Illinois?
Or fragmites.
Phragmites. I'm not sure I understand what that means. There are natural areas, there are fragments of natural areas, and they're scattered throughout the state, like that map at the beginning that I showed. So we do have a lot of them, but they're really small. 10 acres, 5 acres.
Okay, next question is, how is climate change affecting species diversity in Illinois prairies?
Well, it probably isn't affecting it that strongly in Illinois prairie because we have so little left. And so, but the main idea with climate change is, you know, like I mentioned, the glacial relic, the bird's eye primrose. So as the climate warms, the conditions where that plant occurs are going to warm, and it wants to grow in these cool shaded areas. So that plant may not persist. That's why it's more common in Canada where the climate is cooler. But in Southern Illinois, we have plants that are rare, that are becoming a little more common because of that they're more common to the south where it is warmer. So the warming climate is kind of helping some species in Southern Illinois, but to the detriment of the ones in Northern Illinois.
So are there any plants that serve as an indicator species for ecosystem health?
I would say the conservative flora does. So I mentioned the hoary puccoon is a conservative species. It only occurs in pristine, intact, natural areas. There are a lot, so we call those C10s. 10 is the highest number on the scale. So you can, online, you can find a list of all the native plants that occur in Illinois and what their C values are. And any of them that are a 10 are very vulnerable to changes in the environment.
Okay, next question is, what can local communities do to help restore nearby ecosystems?
So this is a big one. We do not have the staff and the funding to maintain all the areas we have. We want to restore areas. We want to make them better. We are identifying additional areas. We want to have more lands in public ownership, et cetera, but we don't have the resources to manage them. And this is a gap that the public can really fill by volunteering. So I coordinate the Plants of Concern program. Volunteers work with me to monitor rare plants, but you can, we need people to contact the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, their local forest preserve district, their local state park, or if they have even federal land like the Shawnee National Forest. We have a Friends of the Shawnee National Forest group. We have a Friends of the Illinois Nature Preserves group. These are all groups that request and work with volunteers to help do on-the-ground management to help these areas and maintain them. So that would be huge opportunity for people to volunteer to help.
So our next question is, how do native plants vary throughout Illinois?
How do they vary? Well, it's interesting that, well, in northern Illinois, the plants are very similar to species that occur farther north. And in southern Illinois, the plants are very similar to plants that occur farther south. So Illinois is positioned kind of right in the middle of the continent. If you think of the Mississippi River, which isn't right in the middle, but it is a good dividing line between east and west, Illinois is in the center. So it's really a convergence of species that are more common to the north, south, east, and west that all join together in Illinois. And that is something that's really unique about the geographic position of the state.
Okay, next question. What challenges may arise when restoring a degraded ecosystem?
Yeah, we have kind of limited tools here to work with, and sometimes it's not always clear what is best. So essentially, there's three main activities to do. One is to remove invasive species, and often they can just be pulled up and removed, but sometimes they have to be cut or even sprayed with herbicide. It is an effective method of controlling these plants. Another one is a lot of the places become too shaded, too filled with woody plants. And so again, we can thin them or remove them. We call this thinning. Sometimes it's called forest improvement. And then lastly, prescribed fire. So we know that fire was once prominent on the landscape, and it's really one of the main reasons why the prairie persisted and was maintained. And we have removed fire as a natural system, but we can put it back in a deliberate way by having prescribed burns. So I would say those are kind of the three main maintenance techniques that we use on natural areas in Illinois to keep them in a high quality condition or to enhance them.
Okay, our next question. What are the different types of ecosystems found in Illinois, and how do they vary in terms of flora, fauna, and climate?
So again, I could talk a whole hour on this. In fact, I have talks just about this, but I will explain that in Illinois, we can divide the state into different natural divisions, and there are 14 natural divisions. And those natural divisions are further just divided into different sections. But within those natural divisions and sections are different natural community types. And I had them listed in the table at the beginning of the presentation. So those are sort of the different areas that occur in the state.
Okay, next question. What is the rarest plant you photographed?
Oh gosh. Probably the oval leaf milkweed that I showed, just because it's only at one site. And if I wanted to go there today and get that photo, I wouldn't be able to. The plants are not looking healthy like that. I'd have to go to another state to photograph them. I think anything else that's rare, I could see it more than just one site, or and they're still there. Like I could go this summer potentially and see them and photograph them. But that oval leaf milkweed, I mean, that was a once in a lifetime kind of thing. I won't see that again, probably in Illinois, at least in the short term. So I'll list that one.
Okay, so we have a lot more questions. Do you need to go, or do you just want to keep doing it?
We can do a few more.
We can do a few more. Okay. So, sure. Our next question, how do you get funding to restore ecosystems?
Well, funding is largely through public entities, but we do get a lot of private contributions as well. We do have a number of nonprofit organizations that do the funding. The Nature Conservancy I mentioned is all, it's privately funded, and they have, it's the largest conservation organization in the world. So they have a lot of resources to dedicate to things. But, as we know, there's never enough funding, never enough staff. Particularly if it's coming through state mechanisms. There's political considerations there, and it depends on people in office, and that is always changing. So funding is definitely a big hurdle, and it's always there. But this is true, for a lot of other important things we need to be doing in Illinois as well.
So the next question is, what is one of your favorite prairies in Illinois?
Okay, so Illinois Beach State Park is definitely high on the list, and then you have to go all the way up to the extreme northeast corner of the state to see that one. Loda Cemetery Prairie in the little town of Loda, which is off Interstate 57, is another one that I visit often. In fact, a lot of the cemetery prairies are really where the best prairie vegetation remains. Goose Lake Prairie State Park, that's another one that is large that comes to mind. It's one of the early ones that was identified and protected. In other parts of the state, we have hill prairies, which I really enjoy. So I mentioned Fultz Hill Prairie in Monroe County. I would say a lot of the hill prairies in Monroe County have seen a lot of management, but hill prairies extend up the Illinois River and beyond. So there are other counties where you can find them as well. Calhoun County and Pike County come to mind. In all the way up into Carroll County and Joe Davis County in the northwest part of the state. So they're small and they're really scattered about, but there are a number of really high quality prairies that still remain in Illinois.
So the next question is, how many invasive species of plants and animals do you encounter?
So there are a lot of invasive species in Illinois, but I would say there's probably about 24 or so in Southern Illinois that I frequently encounter. Some of the worst ones right now are Japanese stiltgrass, which is an annual grass. We have Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine that's hard to control. Japanese chaff flower is another one that's been really dominant. Autumn olive is common. Bush honeysuckle we have all over the landscape. Oriental bittersweet. So those are some of the worst ones that are really prevalent. But there are many others. They're just those are the most common ones.
So the next question is, should we be planting native plants from areas from further south, especially trees?
Well, I would say in your own landscape, you are the decider and you can do what you want. I would encourage you to plant plants that are native to North America is the first and foremost thing. Anywhere else plants are from, or if they're cultivated, ornamentals, those can escape into the environment and become a problem. So if you choose species that are native to North America, that's the best, but it's best really to choose plants that are native to Illinois. But a plant native to Northern Illinois is probably not going to do as well in Southern Illinois as a plant native to Kentucky. So I'm not so much of a purist about staying, Illinois boundaries are geopolitical. There's no, they're not real, so to speak, as far as ecology. So something not native in Illinois, but native in, say, Missouri or Kentucky may be more appropriate in Southern Illinois than in Northern Illinois. So I would say you want to choose plants, even with climate change, even considering that, you want to choose species that are indigenous near to where you live.
Okay, next question. How does biodiversity help ecosystem restoration?
Well, I would say ecosystem restoration is helping biodiversity. That we, again, want lots of different types of plants and animals for a variety of reasons that I've mentioned kind of earlier and could really go on and on about. But yeah, I like to come back to that example with the plane and the parts in the plane. You can remove some parts and it might not affect how the plane's going to fly. But if you remove too many, or you remove one that is playing a key role, then the plane's not going to fly anymore. And when it comes to ecology, we don't even know how to answer these questions. So we want to make sure that we keep as much intact as possible, or this whole system could fall apart.
Okay, next question. What patterns do you find in many similar species of plants?
Patterns. Well, I mean, we categorize plants based on patterns, so to speak. I mean, we look at their floral arrangement and floral anatomy in order to group plants into to similarities. We put them in families together and in larger orders and things. So that's when I think of patterns in plants, I think about similarities there. Now, I guess you could look at, there's a lot of ways to answer this question, so I guess I'll just stay with that.
Okay, and then our last question, how does climate change affect the outcome of these plant restoration projects?
Well, that is an area that we need more research, and the climate is changing slowly, although it is drastic at the same time. So we can talk about the consequences of having warmer temperatures, but one thing that really affects things is seasonality and timing. So when plants bloom, different organisms are active based on different things. So some organisms may respond to day length, and that may be a cue as to when to start blooming. Some organisms, may move around based on temperature. So these things have evolved together over a long period of time, and so they're synchronous. They should be synchronous. And when we have different aspects changing quickly, the evolution cannot keep up, and so we're going to have asynchronous movements now. So warblers are coming through the forest when before the leaves have bud out, or before the insects have emerged, or different consequences like that. So I would really think a lot of the implications have to do with the timing of things related to climate change.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Chris, and for the awesome presentation. We really appreciate you volunteering in the project overall.
I'm happy to help. I'm going to meet another volunteer here right now. We're going to go look for a rare fern here in the Shawnee National Forest.
wow.
So on to the next thing. But thank you for your time. Thanks for the invitation. Have a good day.